retired cowboy, lived alone for years, until 5 Apache gorgeous widows begged for shelter on his ranch.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Late November, 1882. The wind carried frost early that year. Up in the hills of Silver Butte, Colorado Territory, Reed Callahan had already sealed the windows with oilcloth and stacked his final cords of firewood. He wasn't expecting company. He never did. The nearest town was 12 miles downhill through rock and snow. The nearest neighbor had died in spring. The cabin stood alone, square-shouldered against the slope, built by Reed's hands 6 years back when he left the Army and decided he'd rather speak to goats than men. Reed was 32. Before this, he'd worked as a translator, Apache, Spanish, Comanche, used by the military when they didn't want blood, just borders. But he'd seen blood anyway. Too much. He'd seen young women shot during raids, children shoved into wagons, old men left half buried in their own blankets. And when he tried to speak on it, nobody listened. So he left. Since then, silence had suited him. That afternoon, he'd been splitting logs behind the cabin. Thick spruce, still sap wet. His gloves were torn at the thumbs, and his boots had a crack in the left heel. He swung with clean rhythm, not for exercise, not to clear his mind, just because winter was long and would burn fast. He had a kettle heating on the stove and a haunch of goat meat waiting to stew when the quiet changed. It wasn't the wind. It was too steady. Reed froze mid-swing and listened. Footsteps. Several. Light. Cautious. Human. He moved around the side of the cabin, hand near the revolver on his belt, but not drawing yet. As he cleared the porch and stepped past the split-rail fence, he saw them. 5 women. They stood at the edge of the clearing where the snow met scrub. No horses. No wagon. Just feet red from cold, wrapped in rags. They wore dresses that might have been leather or cotton once, now patched, torn, and crusted with frost. Blankets hung from their shoulders, barely covering what was left of dignity. One of them, the one in front, curvy build, dark hair tied back with sinew, took one step forward. Her mouth was dry, but her eyes held steady. Reed didn't move. The woman didn't beg. She spoke straight. "We need a place. One night. We don't ask more than that." Reed looked at her, looked past her. He saw what she wasn't saying. The younger one behind her had a blood stain down her thigh. The tallest of them held her arm like something had been dislocated. One woman carried nothing but a cloth satchel. These weren't strays. These were survivors. Reed glanced toward the trees behind them. Nothing moved. No posse. No riders. He thought about the last time he let someone in. 3 years ago. A trapper who turned out to be running from debt, drank his stores, stole his mare, and left him tied in the barn for a day and a half. But these weren't men. These were Apache widows. He could see it in how they stood, proud, half wild, not broken but worn out. He opened the gate. Didn't say a word. They entered one by one. Slow, watching him as they passed. He caught the scent of blood and pine needles on their clothes. One of them, older than the rest, tall, broad-hipped, deep lines on her face, nodded once but didn't thank him. Inside the cabin, the fire was already low. Reed added a split log, moved the kettle over, and fetched 6 tin bowls from the shelf. He ladled what he had, stew from last night, thick with root vegetables and meat, and passed the bowls without comment. They sat in a circle near the hearth. Sayin, the one who had spoken, stayed on her knees near the fire, palms open toward the heat. Her dress was torn across the chest. Reed noticed the cut. It had been stitched once, then torn again. The skin beneath was sun-browned, damp with cold sweat. She didn't hide it, didn't seem to care. Reed felt his throat tighten. Not desire, not shame, just anger at whoever had done this. The youngest, Tala, though he didn't know her name yet, trembled as she drank. She made no sound, no tears, just quiet swallowing and wide, exhausted eyes. They hadn't come for charity. They had come because there was nowhere else. After supper, Reed handed them folded wool blankets. He didn't ask names, didn't offer small talk. That wasn't how you build trust with people who'd been hunted. He unrolled 2 extra bedrolls from the storage chest, made a place beside the stove. The floor was hard, but warmer than outside. He set down the last blanket near Sayan. She looked up at him. No fear, just calculation. Her eyes scanned his face, his posture, his belt. She knew he was armed, knew he was alone, knew what he could do if he wanted. But he didn't. He just walked away and sat by the window with his rifle across his lap, watching the dark outside in case someone else followed. Behind him, he heard them settle in. One woman started whispering in Apache, soft, gentle sounds. Another laughed, just once low and short. Sayan said something back, then quiet again. It sounded like home, or the echo of one. Reed didn't sleep that night. Not fully. He watched the door, listened to the crack of the fire, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that 5 strangers had entered his home and he wasn't scared. Not really. He felt something else. Responsibility. It sat in his chest, heavy as the snow on the roof. And he didn't turn them out. The morning came quiet and sharp. Reed was already up before the sun crested the ridge. He had slept in the chair by the window, boots on, rifle across his lap. His neck ached, but he didn't stretch. He listened first. Inside the cabin, all 5 women were still asleep. Blankets curled, breath even. The fire had gone to coals. One of them, Paya, the tall one with the hawkish eyes, lay closest to the door like a guard. Tala, the youngest, slept with her knees to her chest, face buried in her arms. The others were scattered across the floor, wrapped in wool and whatever scraps they carried in. Reed set the rifle aside and moved to the stove. He lit the fire slow, quiet, added water to the kettle. His hands worked without thought, habits older than fear. By the time the first light bled across the floorboards, Sayan stirred. She sat up on one elbow, hair loose around her neck, her deerskin dress wrinkled, still torn across the chest. She didn't cover herself. She watched him. Not shy, not forward, just watching, measuring. He met her gaze and gave a short nod. She stood. They didn't speak. Reed handed her a coffee tin. She understood, measured the grounds without asking. By the time the others woke, the scent of coffee filled the cabin. Steam rose from the tin mugs like breath in winter. They ate goat stew again. No one complained, not even the younger one. After breakfast, Sayan stepped outside without a word. The others followed. Reed stayed back, letting the door close. He watched them from the window. They didn't wander. They moved with purpose. Sayan checked the goat pen, whistled once to see how the animals responded. Kaya picked up a torn blanket from the porch rail, looked over the stitching, and sat down to mend it. Paya circled the cabin, eyes scanning the hills, as if expecting someone to come. Nolly dragged a water bucket toward the well without being asked. Tala just stood, hands to her mouth, breathing in the cold. None of them were guests. They were survivors. And survivors didn't sit still. Reed walked out and began splitting wood again. Sayan joined him before long. She didn't ask, just picked up kindling and stacked it beside the cabin. She moved slow, still sore but stubborn. Her dress clung to her legs as she bent, damp from snow. The rip in her side slit was wider today, revealing more skin than she probably realized. Or maybe she did, but she never once looked at him to see if he noticed. She didn't need to. Midday came. The sun barely warmed the ground, but it cleared the frost from the roof. Inside, Reed brought out what little supplies he had: flour, salt, lard, a slab of dried pork. He sat on the table and watched as Nolly and Kaya began preparing dough. They worked like they'd done it 1,000 times. One kneaded, one cleaned the table. No chatter, just rhythm. He sat back, arms crossed. The questions were stacking now. Who were they? Where did they come from? Why now? He didn't ask aloud. But late that afternoon, Sayan stood at the doorway while the others worked and finally gave him something. "We came from below Fort Garland," she said. "There was a raid. White ranchers. Drunken ones. Thought we were hiding warriors." She looked him in the eye. "We weren't." Reed didn't speak. He just looked at her face, bruised near the temple, the side of her neck red with old scrapes. "Most of us lost our men months ago," she continued. "But they don't care. Widow or not. They take." Reed nodded once. No sympathy in his face. Just understanding. "They burned our shelter. Took the little we had. We walked 5 days." Reed looked down. 5 days in that snow. No shoes. Sayan stepped further in. "We saw your smoke." From up the ridge. Figure a man lived here alone, but we'd never have risked it. He stared at her a moment. You guessed right, he said. She gave his smallest smile, then dropped it. We won't stay long. Just long enough to walk again. That part, Reed didn't respond to. That evening,